Mayree Clark. I'm a Stanford MBA 81. When I got out of Stanford, I went straight into the M&A department at Morgan Stanley. And, M&A stands for mergers and acquisitions. I'm sure you all know that. But one of the first things you do in that role is start thinking about how the presentation to the board will go. Because when a company's doing an acquisition, the decision almost always winds up with the board. So it struck me then, wow, these boards, they really matter. They influence the most important decisions that companies make. And it's interesting how they work. Of course, they were ultimately our clients. They were the most powerful piece of our clients. I found that to be something I'd like to learn more about. But since I was in the M&A department at the beginning, I had my head down completely for the first 4 years. I did nothing but work. When I got promoted to vice president, it struck me, hey, maybe I should try and give back to the community a little bit. I'm doing okay, and I should have more time, and I'd like to spend it helping other people. So I got myself connected to one of the senior partners of one of the law firms that I worked with, who had an organization going that was designed to help underprivileged young people get a good education and ultimately go to college. And through that involvement, I ultimately became a volunteer for something called the Student Sponsor Partnership, where young professionals paid for underprivileged kids to go to Catholic schools for high school and improve their graduation rates. And it was a terrific program. So I was really excited to be a volunteer, and I went for it with all I had. I recruited a lot of other people from Morgan Stanley to join, and so it wasn't long before they called and asked me to be on the board. I was, hugely honored. I didn't really know what it meant, but I was, delighted to be there. Then I chaired the sponsor recruitment committee, and so I think I showed some leadership capabilities. And ultimately, I wound up chairing that board after probably 6 or 8 years of being on it. It was a great first experience about really how boards work when you have to lead it. And I was green; I didn't know what I was doing at all, but I learned as I went. A few years later, I was called by a group called the Common Fund, which was a not-for-profit that brought together endowment money. While it was a not-for-profit, it operated $20 billion worth of endowment funds, and so it acted very much like a corporation. At the time, Morgan Stanley wouldn't let you be on a corporate board, but it would let you be on a not-for-profit board, and so I joined that. It was a fantastic experience. I was on that board for 12 years. Served on various committees. Towards the end, I was on the executive committee, which meant I was very involved in things like setting the CEO's comp, which was another, sort of just important learning about boards. My first corporate board situation was for a company called Greenwich Associates, and I was recruited to that board by one of my Stanford classmates who was the CEO. It wasn't a fiduciary board, just an advisory board, but it was an important source of counsel for that private company, and I learned a lot from being on it as well. And then not long after I joined that board, I was asked to think about joining the board of the Stanford University Endowment. So I had all this endowment experience from the Common Fund board, and therefore I was well placed to do it. And of course, I was a Stanford alum. I love Stanford, always have, and was just delighted to join that board. High-powered group for sure. One of the things I did was volunteer to get involved in a strategic plan that the board was doing shortly after the financial crisis. And I really, I was probably the youngest member in that group, and so I really put my shoulder to the wheel and try to do some of the heavy lifting, just the work that was just basic work. And not long after that, I was invited to be on the executive committee, and that again gave me a little bit more insight into the overall organization, a little bit more influence on how things went. After the financial crisis, I was also interested in helping us all emerge from the crisis. And I was in a position where I could not, join the government, spend 24/7 helping out because of the age of my kids and everything. But I ran across a situation where a headhunter was looking to add somebody to one of the boards that the government was bailing out with TARP money. It was called GMAC at the time, the old General Motors Acceptance Corporation. And well, I got the call from the headhunter. It was actually a guy who'd been at Morgan Stanley before me, but who I'd covered as a client, who kind of was in my corner as they were going through the process of making the selection. I was the token woman on the board. Somebody, there were, I guess 7 of us, and I was the only woman. Somebody had to chair the risk committee. I raised my hand. I felt like it was a risky situation, and it was probably less risky to be in the position of the person focused on risk and steering the risk agenda than it was to just sit as a board member. That was a great experience. I learned a lot about regulation and compliance and how the large financial institutions really operate from the inside. The next board seat I had was for a company that I had taken public 25 years before they asked me to go on the board. That was very fun. I knew the family that was involved in the board, and it was a difficult situation. There, I initially served on the compensation committee, then I chaired it, and then I served on the nomination and governance committee, and also the special committee that dealt with the really complicated acquisition situation. Another great learning experience. In 2018, I was contacted by another headhunter about joining the board of Deutsche Bank and chairing the risk committee. Deutsche Bank at the time was the most vulnerable, systemically important financial institution in the world. It had almost gone out of business 18 months before I was asked to join the board. It had kind of righted itself, but it was still in a lot of trouble, and it was in the middle of a very painful change in the CEO. I did it because I was convinced that it was the right thing to do for, just the community. When I was on the GMAC / Ally board, we all did it because we were trying to help the taxpayers make sure they got their money back. And we did, and it was extremely rewarding. The board had a lot to do with the turnaround of that company. And so I knew the board could have influence on a turnaround. And my predecessor as chair of the risk committee convinced me that, we shouldn't only have American banks in the world. It was really important to have a few well-placed European banks that were strong and healthy. So with a lot of trepidation about joining the board of a company with a reputation that was not good at the time, I took the plunge, and I've now been on that board for almost 7 years. I guess the one other experience I'll talk about is a private company I currently serve on the board for, which is called Allview and is owned by Vista Equity Partners. It's my 3rd board with Vista. It's been really fun to be on these small software company boards with one private equity firm where I've really learned how that firm operates, what their special sauce is, how they really go about improving companies, and they're quite good at it. And it's really fun to, on the one hand, work with an organization that's got 80,000 employees, and on the other hand, work with something that's measured in the hundreds. Really invigorating to see both ends of the spectrum. And of course, I love working on things that have to do with technology. Along the way, I've continued to serve on not-for-profits after that first student sponsor partnership board. I now am on the board of a group called the Tricycle Foundation, which I chaired for several years, and which is about distributing Buddhist philosophy, information about Buddhist philosophy, which I care about, I'm interested in, and so that one's been a lot of fun too. I just did the session on what it takes to be an outstanding board member, and I just want to tell you I'm in the aspirational category, but I'm aspiring to be an outstanding board member. I've been doing that for many years. I was really lucky to start young. I was only 27 when I did my first not-for-profit board. I was 35 when I did the $20 billion not-for-profit, which was really like a significant company. I would say it took me more than 10 years just to advance from what we call early days to evolving. And I don't think I started to get good at it until I was, 50. So I'm saying that because I just want to encourage everybody that being a good board member, it really takes time and work and experience. And anybody, I don't mean to say that you have to have a board portfolio in order to be a good board member, not at all. I think many people can walk in and do it like this, but it kind of depends on your interest in the work and your style and how you work with a group. And I'll just say one last thing, we spent a lot of time writing the leading edge stewardship corporate and personal roadmap, and I've learned from every single moment of doing it. I have this co-author, Linda Riefler, and also Carol Lamb, and we talk about um, we talk about this stuff all the time, and we think that it really makes you get better as a board member if you kind of work through problems by talking to with someone else. You have to be careful about confidentiality, and we're always really careful not to say anything to the other, buddy that we shouldn't. But we learn by thinking together, both with our own, existing board members and with other members of Stanford Women Boards. So I urge you to find a buddy and do that too. Thank you.